Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be looking once again at Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics, and today will be a walkthrough of the Schooling of the Soul, Step 8. So in this particular portion, we begin with an exploration of what Bardon calls the great now. So this is an exploration of the present moment. And there's a very strong connection here to the Akashic principle. The more equilibrium we develop, the more equanimity we develop, the more we begin to penetrate the present moment. And this penetration has an interesting effect in that the more close we become to what is now, right, the more the perturbations of time start to dissolve. And as this happens, the efficacy of our mental training, we might call it, of our envisionings start to become more and more pronounced. These envisionings start to take hold causally, right? And then they will reflect out through time. So because of this deepening of our connection with Akasha, cultivated through, of course, equanimity, but also through concentration that is developed through all of the training that you do, as the years go by, your responsibility becomes more and more important. So the introduction to the schooling of the soul in this step 8 is very much involved with purifying the person, the individual, and the evolution of that individual to do the least harm moving forward, to not just to themselves, but to everyone you might encounter. Okay, so I want to look at a few of the different pieces that Bardon exposes here to make sure we discuss them. So, firstly, we have as mentioned, the plasticity of what the mind can fabricate. Okay, and then the ease with which that can be brought into and through the Akasha. So as this starts to refine, it can get very peculiar. So we always need to maintain our equilibrium. Okay, now Bardon makes a clear point about the not harboring evil thoughts or wishing someone ill. So behind all this, as we keep evolving, the will to do good has to evolve with us. Okay, now the people I've met who are in this for purely themselves, their skill caps out. They might be able to develop power to varying degrees, okay, but beyond coarse power, which might be reflective of a few different higher substrates, the skills cap out and the development caps out very quickly. Okay, so the goodwill becomes very, very important, and how one expresses oneself starts to become important as well. And this is a byproduct of the development, of the release, and of the increase in the space in which we identify with, right? So the more expansive our identity becomes, right, the more this starts to develop as a byproduct of that spiritual unfoldment, surrender, and evolution, okay? So this is important because we can't just pretend to be something that we're not. Then we create a veneer of superficial thinking, superficial acting, superficial feeling, and underneath that, there's the undercurrents of all the negatives which are still there and almost more powerful because they're hidden, because we can't observe them. So we have to make sure that the cultivation of what this author would call the ennobled character is done in as honest and sincere a way as possible. Okay? So, as we move through here, of course, there's mentions towards ambition, arrogance, boastfulness, passions, etc. And these, again, because the Akasha is so strong, all of these things are going to pull you out of the equanimity of the Akasha and make everything that we do not just less potent, but also potentially damaging as well. Okay, and so the Akasha will start to offer almost a course corrector in that it will do its best to harmonize lack of harmony. And often, in order to harmonize lack of harmony, what we are brought to is a state of chaos. And so this is the poles, almost we could say, of Akasha, is chaos and harmony. And these work hand in hand. What appears as chaos at one fractal of identity from another will be a much grander harmony. Okay, so in this particular section, we get a very clear indication as to the harmonizing effects of Akasha. Now, again, because of the space or place from which we are viewing that harmony, it might appear as incredible chaos, right? The same as which the place from which we view chaos, right? It might appear as harmony. So this is a very worthwhile exploration from the meditative standpoint, right? To explore chaos and harmony and how these can be two sides of the same coin, depending on the space from which we are viewing them. Okay, and I'm not talking about perspective within the same dimension or the same level of refinement, right? I'm talking about as that level of refinement and the identity opens up, how it changes. Of course, you have varying perspectives within the same spectrum, okay? But then as this spirals up and out, of course, you get a very real, drastic change, okay? Let's see, moving on here. You have a bunch of other points towards the expression of the practicer and the Akasha because of the Akasha. Okay, so Akasha as having its own means of course correcting the practicer. If you have not sorted out all of your issues, or a good portion of them, the more depth you put into the Akasha, the more the Akasha will auto-harmonize those pitfalls. And in the course of harmonizing our issues, we might sustain from a certain perspective a lot of damage. Okay, so this is where we need to be careful in our practice and just slowly nudge the edges and really, really work the integration, unification, and embodiment of the stages of development that we're at, and really have our vital work together, really have our astral harmonies together, and really have done that work mentally, astrally, and vitally, so that as we progress through the Akasha, and beyond from everything that the Akasha offers, we don't sustain damage due to the auto-harmonizing or auto-chaos-inducing nature of the Akasha. Okay? So, past, present, and future, you start to see as your Akasha develops and as your relationship to the present moment develops, you start to see very clearly everything that is pulling or an expression of not the present moment, right? Both in yourself and in others. So everything that is an expression of not the present happens to be a stagnation, right? Something that is locked in place, that is not free to be in the constantly ebbing and flowing flux that is the present. Okay, so we become quite aware of this, and you start to see deeper. Okay, now because one can see more deeply, and of course you've developed your clairsenses, as we discussed in step 7. But not just that, of course, because we can see more clearly cause and effect, what happens is we can start to develop a jaded attitude. It's very easy to become jaded. It's very easy to look with derisiveness and a sense of superiority and negativity towards people who are acting from a place of blindness. Okay, now anyone who's been on the path long enough will of course find this quite hilarious, because every day you become suddenly able to see in places in which you were blind. So it becomes kind of funny at a certain stage, but prior to having experienced this blindness and this awakening, and then further awarenesses of where you were blind and where you're now awake again and again and again, in the beginning of that particular opening, we start to experience ourselves as better than another. So we're in a state of separation. So this needs to be dealt with, and quickly, because what you think, how you see somebody affects them. What you see, how you see the world, puts that into the world. So you change how you see the world. You see with goodwill, you see with acceptance, you see with openness, you see with potential, and that gets brought into the world. When you see with derisiveness, with a jaded attitude, you put that into the space around you, and you impose that on the people, and this creates a intense negative disharmony. And this disharmony, once again, because of the work that you've done to this point, if you've really gone through the practice and the development of the Akasha, this creates some really not so fun backlash. Okay, so the more we develop, the more important it becomes that we see with goodwill, that we feel with goodwill, right? That we act with goodwill. And what goodwill is can be variant depending on what layer of someone's development and freedom from a spiritual standpoint you're working with. Sometimes the satiating of somebody's emotions, the taking care of somebody's emotions from a lower standpoint, what they think they need, what the ways in which somebody might feel important or whatever. If you take care of those, especially from the standpoint of a teacher, you can actually hold them back from a spiritual development standpoint, right? You buffer them in their own feelings of identity and ego. The I'm specialness is a very common one. And if you fulfill that in a person, typically they will then lean that back against you. Then you have this weird sticky thing that occurs from an astral standpoint, and that student's development, their ability to evolve of their own accord, starts to degrade. So sometimes from the standpoint of a teacher, you have to open yourself up to being have people feel somewhat negatively towards you as they're working through their own potentials and freedom, and getting over that particular need to be to feel a certain way about themselves, and have that be validated by the external environment, which would be you as a teacher. So This is all part of the evolution, and it might sound convoluted, but once your mind can bounce back and forth between the varying perspectives, you'll perceive this quite clearly. Okay, so development and the good with which you view yourself and the world around you. Okay, now there's more that goes on here. We discussed how you see things, okay? And this then moves into the expression of what you see. So as what you can see starts to become more and more clear, maybe the pitfalls in different people, of course, you would have noted these in yourself as well. There's a tendency in the beginning when these observations open up to start telling everybody what their problems are, right? And you go, oh, well, I can see it. The example I gave prior was it becomes as clear as seeing someone standing on one leg and jumping and patting themselves on the head or whatever. And it's super obvious, so you point it out and then you go, oh, well, I'm helping. So he makes a point here of only discussing this when people ask you. And when they do ask you, to be very, very careful with how you approach this. Because like many, I've trained with people and spent time with people who were for me, in a sense, were going, hey, these are your problems. Here's what you can do to sort of work around it and to elevate your way through it and evolve through it. Now, when someone tells you your problems, they are not taking into consideration the subconscious effect of that. So if your goal as somebody who sees problems is to show everyone around you that you can see their problems and then make yourself the solution to those problems, then great. You can do that, and now you are creating someone who is a sheep to you. Right? And this is something we want to avoid, especially as we progress along the path as teachers, but also just as a good person. So how you approach this becomes a more and more refined skill. If your aim is to not create a sheep, right, but to liberate somebody from their own tendencies and their own blockages, then you have to approach this in a much more refined way. And this will become evident on a person-by-person basis as you evolve. Right? So this starts with seeing people with acceptance, with seeing people with an open and clear mind, right? With seeing the potential in people, not specific in potential, right? Not locking them into one potential that you see, but an openness to potential itself, okay? And this will start to clear a lot of that stuff, all right? So this becomes very important. A lot of people will take pride and praise themselves for going, this is the dirty work. You know, somebody has to do this. Somebody has to tell these people how fucked up they are, etc., etc., etc. And almost 100% of the time, this is doing more harm than good. Now, if the person that's being told this is in a state of mind where they're constantly learning and growing, they might feel very grateful. Thank you for showing me this thing, and etc., etc. But the actual damage, the lock, the cohesion, is almost always much, much stronger than the liberative effect of that. So if this is approached in a more skilled way, then often without ever mentioning what the problem might be, the problem starts to dissolve on its own based off of the interaction. So this is a higher order of teaching, and it takes a lot to work from that space. Okay? So anyway, Bardon sort of mentions that here, so that we can sort of get in touch with this, because at this point, if you've really been developing with the training, you will the needing this, right? It will help moving forward, okay? So then some more things that we tend to get stuck on as we progress on the spiritual path, imposing how things are supposed to be. I'm a spiritual person with the identity of that, therefore, blah, 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 blah. This starts to come out at this point as well. Okay, let's see if some light makes it. There we go. You can sort of see me better. Okay, so this next bit, I'll just read from the book here. A true magician accepts life the way it is, presented to him. He enjoys the good and learns from the evil and is never despondent. You know your own weaknesses, I'm now paraphrasing, and you've done what you can to eliminate them and continue on that work. You don't entertain thoughts of remorse, okay? It suffices to acknowledge one's faults and not to relapse. Okay, so guilt, remorse, these types of things they don't have a place as you are living more and more within the present moment. You act to the best of your ability in the moment, and the more you integrate with the present, the less there is in terms of projections of the future, projections and clingings to the past, the more we could say, like, correctly, in quotes, you tend to act now. And there's some very strong correlations to a lot of the myths around the Archangel Michael, that sword of fire, that this is the point of action, and this is the only way you could act now. So because you've acted with the best of your possible connection to what is true in your development now, how you've thought, felt, and acted is a cause for the next most correct thing that could happen, right? So that's sort of this aspect of not having remorse, right? Now, accepts, let's see, the good. So we often, like, in spiritual worlds, we'll try to cut ourselves off at the knees when it comes to experiencing the good, right? And trying to waylay the evil. But as we are more and more in tune with the harmonizing and chaos-inducing effects of Akasha, your equanimity is such that what is good, and what is not good is still a thing. So then it's just what is, and you move freely from that point. You think freely from that point, you feel freely from that place, and you're able to act freely from that place because you are in a greater and greater and greater unity and equilibrium with the Akasha and with the present moment. Okay? So, self-pity, constant complaining, these types of things, these have no place as one keeps evolving. And so this is why this section I find is very important, is that if we can read it from a place of confirmatory evolutionary effects when it comes to someone's spiritual development, then we can go, okay, I'm moving towards this place of being. Okay, if we are trying to read this and then go, I need to be this way, I'm going to use my will of a lower degree and impose this, then you're going to run into some problems, okay? So, blah, blah, blah. Of course, we're still talking about plans for the future. Okay, so in terms of the simplicity of this, okay, this really comes back to the Akasha. Acknowledge, so just at the end of this paragraph, he must acknowledge the Akasha as the great now and think and act accordingly. Okay, now anything that robs us of the present will be a place in which we are absent of equanimity. Okay, so that might be something that you remedy with your element training, with your working with the envisioning in the eye gate, the ear gate, the feeling gate, etc., to start to bring some of these areas into balance. Now, the more refined you get with your understanding of at more and more subtle levels of will, of discernment and wisdom, of cohesion and attachment, and of course of the consciousness layer that starts to permeate, through which all these things permeate. As that starts to refine, you'll be able to really start to fine tune and observe when and how you are coming out of equanimity and out of the present. Okay, and this is where there's so much value in the preparatory phases and really having developed your understanding of the creative processes and how these creative processes, as they might be slotted into each of the elemental phases, can be stimulated externally. And because we've worked with the creative process, we are in such a deep relationship with it that our understanding of the destructive process in relation to externally stimulated creative processes can be put into work, and we can very, very quickly release and find once again the depth of the harmonious nature of the Akasha. Once again, harmony can induce incredible chaos. A very important thing to throw in there. Okay? So let's see, moving along here. Blah, blah, blah. So, okay, so that's basically where this little part ends. And then an increase of whatever particular deficit you might have, work that for periods of, what he gives here is 15 minutes. And if you can purely focus in a depths of samadhi for 15 minutes, that's pretty good. Okay, now a moment of samadhi can be life-altering, right? And if you can really tune in there for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, and then keep progressing that, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, it's pretty impressive. You'll do some drastically potent work with that samadhi. So this is where, he's brought you from 5 minutes to 15 minutes. Many people will meditate for many hours, but the majority of that meditation is the mind wandering around, right? So how many minutes of a 3-hour meditation is when actually in the depths of samadhi and union with the object of meditation, right? Usually a hell of a lot less than the duration of the meditation. So if you can have your full 3 hours or whatever it is that you do of meditation pure and tuned in, that's pretty, you're doing pretty good, okay? So that's it for this beginning section to the schooling of the soul. And I wanted to do this separately because there is so much to discuss there. Thanks for your patience with me reading through it as well there, because there's so many things he points out. Okay, the development of the person that is doing the work, the liberation of the mind and perspectives, the liberation of the astral substrates and emotional cohesions, the liberation of habitual identity and of vital and physiological habits. This is all a part of the process. And as you develop, these changes will come about in and of their own accord. And you will find that you are a different person day to day. And if you're really going deep, moment by moment, minute by minute, hour by hour. And of course, month to month, week to week, year to year, who you were is it's like looking at an entirely different being when you look back into the past. So really working with the Akasha and finding this relationship to the present, to the emptiness of the present, to the fullness of the present, to being the bridge through which form and formless can cross, can dissolve and manifest, and the space within which that bridge exists. There's so much here. So really have a think on this and meditate on it, and have some fun with it. Take things lightly, take things as they come. And, if you take things seriously, you are holding on to them. Allow things to come, allow things to go. This is where students who are looking for particular astral relationships with a teacher will often be disappointed and potentially get a little irate and, somewhat hurt, is when a student expresses something looking for a very dense astral reaction from a teacher, right? Telling them often, looking for, oh, you're so important, you're so special, or we have this super special connection and all this stuff. Or they're looking for, oh, wow, that's amazing, all this stuff from a teacher. And the teacher just sort of laughs, takes it in stride, knows where they're at. Sometimes that can dissuade a student a little bit. But if a teacher offers those, then like we mentioned in this little portion here, the teacher is also creating some very, very big hurdles for the student in the future. So, you have to weigh these things. And if you're interested in training, please check out the website. We have a Tai Chi program, a Qi Gong, Hermetic Magic, and meditation program, and a Q&A video reference library where I get videos up for any questions you might have on the content. And also, if you're interested in in-person training, I offer private coaching, and we have a 16-day retreat coming up in June 2025 here in BC, Canada. All right, hope to see you there. Bye.